They got Colombian, Brazilian dark roast. I haven't had that. Jamaican Blue Mountain, French vanilla gourmet blend. Yes, I'm reading off here. They even have decaf over there. The Western fries, the breakfast sandwiches, and, of course, the delicious fried chicken. Make sure you're using the app when you're there pumping your gas, and you'll get your coffee for free. Luke Jones joins us now to discuss all things Ravens weekend, not named Lamar Jackson, right? Like, so this draft is so thick, dude, right? I mean, it's Ozzy's last draft, and it's, Harbaugh's 11th, and where are we with Flacco? And now we've replaced Flacco, and we got a tight end, and he's sort of Todd Heapy, and then all of a sudden you look up, and they got 7 picks on the last day. It was quite a haul, and I would just say, begin with this, and I know we talked about this earlier. From a tactical standpoint, if you want to call it masterful from draft picks and maneuvering and getting all the powder out of the keg, I will give Ozzie Newsome an 11 on this draft for that. Now, whether the guys can play or not, I'm never willing to give an 11 3 days after the draft. It's just not the way I roll,
Yeah, because you have no idea. I mean, if Lamar Jackson's horrible and Hayden Hurst is Max Williams all over again, and Orlando Brown is much more the football player that we saw with the combine results, more so than the tape at Oklahoma, then we're going to be talking about this draft setting the franchise back 5 years. I mean, that's why. I mean,
and what will the next general managers and coaches' names be?
Exactly. I mean, that's why the grades right after a draft are just silly to me. I mean, but to the point you were making, and I would agree with this. I think from a standpoint of maximizing the draft capital that they had and turning it into 12 football players. And let's keep in mind, 4 of those were in the final 2 rounds. Those are no more than scratch-off tickets. And we'll get into some of those guys as well.
I like that. Is that the first time you've used that?
I mean, that's really all it is, though.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, you can point to Adalys Thomas being a 6th-round pick, or Michael Campanaro and D'Angelo Tyson gave them a little bit of use as 7th-round picks, but
I want Bradley Bozeman to sit and eat crab cakes with me somewhere. You know what I mean? I don't even know Bradley Bozeman. He's got a great name though, but he's a 6th-round draft pick. He's Ryan Jensen, right?
You assume those guys aren't going to pan out, and if they do, then great. But to the point that you were making as far as being masterful from an extracting value standpoint. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, masterful. I thought it was good in that way. I think clearly they made a lot of trades. That's stating the obvious when you look how many picks they had going into this draft and how many they ended up with. So, the big question will be, did they utilize that value properly? But I think from a needs standpoint, other than saying, I don't love the fact that they waited till day 3 to draft wide receivers because, quite frankly, we know the history there. The Ravens haven't developed day 3 wide receivers worth anything, beyond a song every once in a while. Someone that's contributed a little bit here and there. But beyond that, I think you go down the list and say, well, they needed a tight end, and frankly, they needed 2 tight ends, and they did that with Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews. They needed a right tackle. I'm not convinced Orlando Brown Jr. comes in and starts day 1, but he's going to be in the mix.
Boy, the Combine did him dirty, right? When we landed in Indianapolis, we stalked him around. He's a great kid. I mean, I've been emailing with him once a week for, the last month and a half. It's kind of amazing that they drafted him in. I mean, he grew up, a mile away from here, and then his family moved after his father's death and all that. It's an incredible story, and I'm pulling for him in a big, big way just because I like him. I liked his dad a lot too, but he's really different than his dad, and I'm going to be in his corner squarely from the minute he gets here. And I think, so will most of the building and anybody that knew Zeus. I mean, this is a hell of a story. I mean, just from a story, that would be a great story in this draft the same way Shaquem Griffin's a great story. I mean, there's great stories all over the draft. But we've got a bunch of them here, right? I mean, every one of these guys has a story that's going to be told, and this is as long and as deep a haul as Ozzie's ever had. There's more chances here. There's more scratch-off tickets, as you like to say, right?
Yeah. I mean, the late-round picks are scratch-off tickets. Guys, certainly you want your first-round picks. You want day 2 picks to pan out, and you're hoping of all the day 3 picks that you make, you're hoping maybe you can find one starter out of that group. And when I say starter, eventual starter, and you're hoping you can find a couple good backups out of that group. Realistically speaking, that's what a good draft is. A great draft is you find 3 starters and you find 2 or 3 other guys that are valuable backups or guys that contribute.
Well, a great draft is 2 Hall of Famers.
Well, sure. Yeah, and that's where I had to laugh with John. And look,
that's
John
all
Harbaugh
pump the
was
brakes,
fired up.
man. I mean, come on.
Come on, man. Like, and even for him to say the best of his time there, it's like, well, the first year you drafted Joe Flacco and Ray Rice with your first 2 picks. I'm not sure you're topping that anytime soon.
Seriously, let's say that Orlando Brown turns into Marshall Yanda and Lamar Jackson turns into, I don't know, Deshaun Watson or whatever he's going to be. It's still not going to top Ogden and Ray Lewis. Right, exactly.
That's still not 96.
Yeah,
no.
exactly.
But there are plenty of possibilities here. And, even go down the list in day 3, Anthony Averett, a 2-year starter at Alabama, not as decorated as Marlon Humphrey, but certainly a guy who right now is not going to have any chance to play just because they have about 10 corners on this roster. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, especially if Jimmy Smith is ready to go during training camp and shows that he's ready to go for the start of the season. What does that mean for someone like Brandon Carr potentially? Could he be a trade chip if there's a team desperate for a starting caliber corner at the end of the preseason? Who knows? But they took Averett. He's someone that should be in play at least as a special teams guy right away and has a chance to become a number 2 starting corner at some point in time down the road. Kenny Young, UCLA linebacker, which here's a funny little fact for you. Jonathan Ogden was the first player taken in Ravens history from UCLA. The Ravens did not draft another UCLA player until Saturday, and they took 2 of them. So kind of wild there, but Kenny Young, a linebacker, should be in the mix at least at the weak side inside spot that Patrick Owasu held last year, and the results were mixed there. I think we all would agree with that. If there was one spot on the defense where you said they should probably address that at some point during the draft, I think that was the spot. Beyond,
well, they had it addressed with Zach Orr. I mean, it really is amazing when we start to pick up these drafts and we start picking these pieces up and we talk about a kid who got killed down in South Florida. It would have been on the field for the team last year and probably this year. We're talking about Zach Orr and this freak thing that happened to him that would have been the difference maker. I mean, even Dennis Pitta again and again, and I know by the 3rd time we were all like, well, this isn't going well, right. But that was a freak thing. Sergio Kindle's a freak thing. The Brashad Perryman things and the Matt Elam things, those are the unforgivable ones, right? The Arthur Browns, the ones where the guys are healthy scratches. That's a different situation, but they have had some really weird stuff happen here, and I think a lot of franchises are having that now, that guys are walking away from the game in the middle of their career and saying, I don't want to do this, or they're throwing guys out for kneeling like Reed and even Kaepernick, who would hold down a spot. That there are guys who are not available to play for whatever reason that happen in these drafts as well. And, that's another sort of unfortunate side of this, is that there is a numbers game with the injuries. I mean, we saw Ryan Shazier. I mean, there's no better story from the weekend than him doing what he did and walking the way he did. But we would not have been talking about that a year ago. That's what that's the real part of this game when you see Ryan Shazier.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And getting back to what you were saying about the Ravens, they have had a lot of stuff happen in that regard. And I know fans and a lot of media and publicly, the team's not going to use those things happening as an excuse, but they're part of the story here. Go back and look every single year. FootballOutsiders.com does a great piece every spring on adjusted games lost. And basically, it's a way of trying to kind of calculate how much teams are actually impacted by injuries. Because when you just say, well, 16 players were on IR, you have no idea if that means 16 real players or 4 camp bodies and 6 backups and 3 real legitimate starters. So they look at that, and every single year you look at the list and you see the teams that are at the bottom of that list. Very, very rarely do you see those teams in the playoffs. And guess what? The Ravens were in the top 6 in that category. And of those 6 teams, the Ravens were the best of those 6 teams. Seattle, I think, was the other team that was in that group. And, hey, the Seahawks missed the playoffs. Imagine that. So you can try to say that that's not an excuse. And look, I'm not saying that forgives everything that's happened. And to your point, certain draft picks you can look to and say, well, someone might have gotten hurt. Max Williams got hurt with his knee. Now, is it something they should have caught before he entered the league? Maybe, because it is something that he dealt with in college. But, injuries...
Well, it cost the kid in Michigan, right? I mean, that kid in Michigan can play. He's got a heart condition, and, it's a difference between giving you this much money or that much money and where our risk is going to be. And with all the analytics out there, I mean, people didn't like the Lamar Jackson trade from the Ravens' perspective. They thought that they gave up too much. I mean, everything is analyzed here. But the injury part of this thing and the freak part of this thing and the fact that the Steelers had to go replace Ryan Shazier in the draft, they weren't thinking about that in Week 6 last year, nor were the Ravens thinking about, we got Peanut playing linebacker, now we have to go out and find someone in the 18 draft. But such is life in the league with a 53-man roster and a violent game. I mean, and more bodies from your perspective, and I guess the wizardry of this draft is, let's get more guys we like in here, even if they're pick number 212 and Greg Sinnat, who is not Senate, by the way. There is no E. It's not silent. And Zach Sealer, whoever these guys are, bring them in here. We'd rather have those guys. Hell, the scouts were out chasing all these guys around on Sunday and waving money around at wide receivers to come to camp in New Orleans and stuff, because there are a lot of guys out there that want to play in this league. Yeah, there's no question about it. And I mean, keep in mind, every team has a 90-man roster at this point in time, so there's going to be a lot of that. I mean, whether you're a team like the Ravens who had 12 draft picks, or you're another team that maybe only had 6 or 7, and you're signing more UFAs than undrafted free agents, which the Ravens are still going to sign plenty of them as well. And what's funny, the Ravens drafted all these players in the 6th and 7th rounds on Saturday, but the Ravens have had more success with undrafted guys than 6th and 7th round picks, typically speaking, when you consider they have an undrafted guy on their roster every single year. Oh, yeah.
And sometimes more than one. I mean, sometimes it's 2, maybe even 3, depending on a year. So, I thought that was interesting from that standpoint, that they felt so compelled to collect picks later on in this draft, considering the success. And they still sign the rookie free agents, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times you're able to dictate a little bit more with some of those rookie free agents than just having draft picks. I mean, you can you're depending on money and things like that, you can offer better opportunities. So, but I think you look at this draft class. Certainly, they addressed more defense in day 3. Obviously, day 1 and day 2 was all offense, which was certainly refreshing, regardless of the Lamar Jackson pick and your opinion of that. But they checked a lot of boxes, and that's great on paper, but you have to see how it plays out, because, as I pointed out to you when we were talking about this earlier, 3 years ago, you looked at who they took in that draft: Perriman, Max Williams, Carl Davis, Zadarius Smith. Those were needs. Those were direct needs to players who had left earlier that offseason, from Torrey Smith to Owen Daniels to Haloti Ngata to Pernell McPhee. And of those 4 players, Carl Davis has been okay. Zadarius Smith has been an okay contributor. And Rashad Perriman and Max Williams have largely been non-factors. So you can always get excited about what happens on paper, but you have to see how these guys play out. But if you're the Ravens with 12 draft picks, certainly you're hoping the day 1 and day 2 guys pan out, or at least 3 out of the 4, if we're being realistic, knowing what history generally says about these drafts. And then on day 3, you're hoping you can find a starter. You're hoping you can find 2 or 3 good backups. And if you do all that, you put all that together, you have a really good draft that's, quote, masterful, as the Ravens were trying to describe it over the weekend.
He is Luke Jones. He's Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter as well. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by friends at the Maryland Jockey Club. I'm headed down to Laurel on Saturday for the Kentucky Derby. I may have a julep. Obviously, the Caps are playing afterward as well. It's a very, very busy week around here. Anything you miss, you can find in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. The kids call it podcasting it. No static at all. It is there for you. Speaking of no static at all, Steely Dan's playing Model Lyric in October, my 50th birthday week. That's going to be October 11th. Jackson Brown is there on Thursday night. I'll be down at the Model Lyric seeing Jackson Brown do his thing on Thursday night. I'm excited about that. Might even have a couple pair of tickets to give away here before the week is over as well. Learn about all that they do at model-lyric.com, out online, as well as Jackson Brown shooting into town. The Baltimore Brigade play on Friday night down at the Royal Farms Arena. I went to the game on Saturday. Kid Randy Hippert, he can throw the football around. Brigade, I'm wearing my hat. It's the blue B on there. Had about 1,500 down there on Saturday, looking to get more folks out, so I'm spreading the word. Come on down and see an exciting indoor brand of football. Ron Jaworski owns the Philadelphia Soul. He also owns a golf course with a guy named Joe Flacco, who's the other quarterback for the Ravens these days. We'll have Jaws on this week as well to talk about the Philadelphia Soul coming in to play the Brigade on Friday night. Royal Farms Arena. You know Royal Farms is with us. Real fresh, real fast. That is the Kona blend in my cup. Although I heard about this Brazilian dark roast. I'm circling that. I'm going to pick up the Brazilian dark roast soon. Make sure you're using the Rofo app when you're pumping your gas. You'll get the points. You get free fried chicken. You get free Western fries. Delicious coffee. It's Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. They are all over the place. Luke, when we get, I guess we come down to it, talking about all these draft picks, and we say, all right, what does this mean for the team for next week and 3 weeks from now and 6 weeks from now when they're out there throwing it around kind of sort of for real for the week that they do that in June before they bust up and come back in late July. And they're going to have some extra time, right, because of the Hall of Fame game. So that does play into account with all these baby birds running around at this point. But positionally, we talked about right tackle, we talked about center, we talked about tight end, we've talked about wide receiver, although they have three, decorated wide receivers now on the roster that they're going to come back with, a whole different room. So I think they've addressed that need, at least in the near short term. They're going to have a quarterback controversy for the fans, but I think anyone that would walk into the room right now and look at Joe Flacco and look at Lamar Jackson and say, go out and play this week against the Bills, they have none of that in their building. That'll be for the fans and for you and me and for every person I bring on this week to talk about the long-term effects of that. But I don't think that there's any effect on that in June. Just Joe Flacco's team. He'll come in. He'll run the offense. People will fall in line. But where do you see battles right now, and where do you see George Kokinis and Eric DeCosta out looking at pro personnel and saying, where are we going to find the Jeremy Maclin off of the edge of this year's roster or the Austin Howard, right?
Right. And I don't know specific names that they could be targeting, but I think you do look at certain positions. I think on the offensive side of the ball, to your point, wide receiver, is there someone they could still bring in that could offer a unique skill? Sure. Do I think they're signing Dez Bryant? No. I don't think something like that's happening. In fact, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of market is out there for him at this point in relation to what he wants financially.
By the way, how did that get out that the Ravens had offered him a deal and that he didn't? I mean, I found that to be kind of like, the Ravens don't talk like that usually. I heard that maybe to be, agent talk. You know what I mean?
Or after the fact when the Ravens don't really, when they get Willie Snead and they're okay with the idea that Dez Bryant spurned them. I don't think it's shocking. I mean, we already talked about this. I mean, the Ravens had some cap space, but not enough where they could give Dez Bryant a huge one-year deal that he was looking for, which, if he's looking for that in March, and I think back to what Alshon Jeffrey did with the Eagles last year, that wouldn't have been a bad strategy on his part, but when you get cut in mid-April, well, your options are more limited then. So the Ravens were more willing to accommodate him on a multi-year deal. I'm guessing probably similar to what they gave Michael Crabtree, maybe a little bit less, but that's what they were looking to do, and he wasn't interested in that. And look, if he's trying to reestablish himself as a player and then hit the free agent market for one last payday, that's his prerogative, but I think his side has severely miscalculated the market, and now it's going to become even more complicated as far as post-draft, knowing that there were teams out there who needed a receiver and got it. So it's going to be interesting.
It's been an interesting offseason, dude. Ozzy's done a nice job. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about this, but this has been creative, interesting, food behind, left a quarterback behind that may or may not be able to do this at that kind of a level. Certainly going to be an exciting player. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think all the way around, we're going to be talking a lot about this, but if we go back to the disappointment of the ball going over the head, right, and we go back to where we've been for what's it been, about 16 weeks now, give or take, right, and you and I, even sitting with Joe Douglas and those guys that used to be Ravens in Minnesota the week before the Super Bowl, that the Ravens had done nothing at that point, and from where they've been over the last 12 weeks, to make the team better, to make the team interesting, to make the team exciting, to sell hope, prosperity, a future, a current. I give him about a 9.5. I really do. I don't know what more you and I could have expected. I can go back and listen to you and I back in January about where all the holes were and the concerns and the worries. If you would have, put me in the way ahead machine and moved me up to May 1st and said, you're going to have Lamar Jackson, this kid from South Carolina, you're going to draft Orlando Brown before the Combine now, right? You're going to get all these guys and 11 draft picks, and you're going to pick up these wide receivers. You're going to have Michael Crabtree coming in. I would say, okay, we were going to lose Ryan Jensen. I would have crystal balled that,
Sure.
Not for that amount of money, but I would have said they weren't going to keep him. So, I give them high marks. I really do. And I know the national media is, and I'll let you wrap on this because you and I will get after it for Brian Billick and everybody else is going to talk about it this week. But everybody's going to give them high marks, I think.
Yeah, and let's face it, people give the Ravens high marks in the draft every year. I can't remember a year where they didn't get a high mark since I've been covering the team. I mean, that's part of it. We'll see. I'm not convinced that this team's dramatically better than it was last year. I think they're potentially better in some areas. I think they're potentially worse in some areas. Getting back to what you were asking as far as areas that they still need to address or areas that are still question marks, center is still a question mark. They added a center in the 6th round. That is not a solution. That is a possibility for the future, but I think anyone expecting Bradley Bozeman to step in and start this year, I think that is a pipe dream. But I think you look at that position, even with Orlando Brown, who I love from a sentimental standpoint, I love from a game tape standpoint, but you can't ignore historically poor combine numbers and wonder, is it just because he's not a gifted athlete, or is it because he didn't work hard before the combine? And I think that's a fair question when you test as poorly as him. So right tackle, even though there's competition now there, and I feel better about it, that's still a question to me.
By the way, I ran into Alex Lewis at the Harbor on Saturday. He looked, he looks fit. I mean, Like he looks strong and big and solid. He
was never the kind of guy that you looked to and said, well, he's just a fat lineman. I mean, he was never that kid. And who knows? Getting back to what I was saying about the center position, there's still a scenario where you could see someone like Alex Lewis move to center, at least to compete there. We don't know. I mean, that's where OTAs are going to be really interesting in that regard. But you go down the list on the offensive side of the ball. I do like the diversity that they have on paper with their wide receiver group. Crabtree being the possession guy, a guy that's more of a red zone threat, third down threat. Willie Snead, a slot guy. John Brown, a speed guy. Even bring the two new kids into the equation. Jaleel Scott is 6'5", even though we know the Ravens have historically not developed tall wide receivers, even into contributors other than Marlon Brown for a year, I guess. Jordan Lastly is the ultimate boom or bust guy. He's had some off-field issues. That's the reason why he was a 5th-round pick. He has inconsistent hands, but he averaged 18.3 yards per catch at UCLA last year and had 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns in 9 games.
He's their Antonio Brown, throwing the bomb to him, right? Like,
I mean, who knows? I mean, he could be he might not make the team, or he could end up being a guy that blossoms into that surprising late-round pick that the Ravens have never been able to develop. I don't know. I like it in the 5th round. I wouldn't like that in the 3rd round with that kind of a profile. But there's at least some upside to this wide receiver group now. Now, I don't think it's dramatic upside long-term necessarily because John Brown's on a one-year deal. Michael Crabtree's not getting any younger and is coming off of a down year. And Willie Snead is on a 2-year contract. So it's not as though you can point to one guy in that wide receiver group and say, yup, that's going to be Lamar Jackson's guy for the next 5 years if we're talking fast-forwarding a year from now. They don't have that guy, but I do think there's at least more diverse skill in this group. But they're still counting on bounce-back years from the 3 guys they signed. Let's remember that. Those 3 guys combined for about 1,000 yards last year, and Crabtree was most of that. So let's not just say, oh, yeah, that's way better than Mike Wallace and Jeremy Maclin. Well, we don't really know that yet. I think on paper it looks better, but, again, you're talking about guys that need to bounce back. So you feel better about wide receiver. Would you have loved to have been able to go out and found a long-term solution, whether that was being able to figure out a way to sign Allen Robinson, whether it was drafting DJ Moore in the first round instead of Hayden Hurst. I mean, these are all preferences. I'm not saying the Ravens made the wrong move, but you can point to things like that. But I think the group, certainly there is more upside potential there with some of the names they added, but at the same time, they're still not that. The closest thing they have to a sure thing is Crabtree, and look at his numbers a year ago. The guy's coming off of a down season. There's no way to sugarcoat that. So there's still a lot that has to go right, but I think they have done an adequate to good job of addressing most of their needs. The O-line is still the one place I point to, and I'm still uneasy about that. I'm not anti-Orlando Brown. I think in the 3rd round that was fine, but I'm not ready to sign off on him being the answer at right tackle from day one. That might be a case where he needs to come in and compete, and they might have to go with James Hurst at right tackle. And whether it's Joe Flacco or Lamar Jackson playing, that makes me really, really nervous at that spot.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can find him anytime, Luke at WNST.net. We're in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. You download the TuneIn Radio app and listen from wherever you are. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.